Ace Frehley lifted his fingers from the strings. He turned his head. And he realized, the noise was gone. Detroit. 1983, Cobo Arena. 7,000 people in the darkness beyond the stage lights. The usual roar. The usual chaos. Amplifiers screaming. Drums pounding. The crowd a single living organism of sound and motion. Ace Frehley stood center stage with his sunburst Les Paul, playing the solo everyone had paid to hear. His fingers moved across the fretboard with practiced precision. The muscle memory of 15 years, 10,000 shows, a million notes played in 1,000 different cities that all blurred into one endless tour. He played the way he always played. Technical. Clean. Effortless. And then, in the middle of the third chorus, something changed. Not in the music. In the space around the music. As his right hand stopped moving. His fingers lifted away from the strings. The notes died. He stood completely still, his head tilted slightly, like someone listening for a sound only they could hear. The band kept playing behind him. The drums continued their relentless pulse. The bass rumbled. But Ace had stopped. For the first time in 15 years, he was hearing silence. Not the absence of sound. Something else. Something deeper. The noise, the constant, overwhelming, suffocating noise that had filled every moment of his life since 1973, was gone. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what happened on that stage in Detroit, you need to understand what had been building for 15 years. Ace Frehley wasn't always Ace Frehley, guitar legend and rock icon. In 1973, he was Paul Frehley from the Bronx, 22 years old, decent guitarist, no formal training, no connections, no reason to believe he'd ever be more than a session player if he was lucky. He answered an ad in Rolling Stone. Guitarist wanted for new band. He showed up to the audition in jeans and a leather jacket, carrying a battered guitar case, and walked into a room where Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were waiting. They asked him to play. He played. They hired him that day. Told him he'd need a stage name. Told him he'd need a persona. Told him the band was going to be theatrical, visual, a complete experience beyond just music. We're going to wear makeup, Gene said. Costumes. Platform boots. You be the Spaceman. Silver paint, stars on your face. You represent the unknown, the cosmic, the mystery. Ace nodded. Okay. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He just accepted it and got to work. Kiss exploded. 1974, 1975. 1976, album after album. Tour after tour. The makeup became legendary. The costumes became iconic. The personas became real to millions of fans. Gene was the demon. Paul was the star child. Peter was the catman. And Ace was the spaceman. Except he wasn't. Not really. Ace Frehley was a guitarist. That's all he'd ever wanted to be. A guy who played guitar. But the world didn't see a guitarist when they looked at him. They saw silver paint and stars. They saw a character. A gimmick. Music journalists wrote about the spectacle, the theatrics, the show. They barely mentioned the guitar playing. When they did, it was always in context. Frehley's spaceman persona complements his cosmic-sounding solos. As if the persona came first. As if the music was secondary. Other musicians, real musicians, the ones Ace respected, would see him at industry events and smile politely. Great show, they'd say, the subtext clear, great show, not great playing. Producers in the studio would compliment the energy, the vibe, the commercial appeal. They rarely talked about his technique, his tone, his musicianship. Even within the band, the dynamic was clear. Gene handled business. Paul handled image. Peter handled rhythm. And Ace handled, being the spaceman. The guitar was just part of the costume. For 15 years, Ace never defended himself. Never explained. Never demanded recognition for his playing separate from the character. He just played. Show after show. City after city. Behind the makeup, beneath the costume, carrying a guitar that most people saw as a prop. The noise built slowly. Not the stadium noise. The other noise. The voice that said, they don't take you seriously. The voice that said, they think you're a gimmick. The voice that said, "You're just the guy in the silver paint." And Ace never spoke back to that voice. It just kept playing. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. By 1983, cracks were showing. Kiss was touring without makeup for the first time. The personas were gone. Gene, Paul, Peter, Ace, they were just four men in regular stage clothes playing rock music. The fans were confused. Some felt betrayed. The spectacle that had defined the band for a decade was gone, and what remained was just music. The reviews were mixed. Some praised the stripped-down approach. Others mourned the loss of the theatrics. But for Ace, something unexpected was happening. It was being seen. Not the Spaceman. Not the character. Used as Frehley. Guitarist. And the world wasn't sure what to make of him. A review in Rolling Stone after a Chicago show. Without the makeup and costumes, Kiss feels strangely ordinary. Frehley's guitar work, while competent, lacks the cosmic punch his Spaceman persona once suggested. Competent. That word sat in Ace's mind for days. Competent. Not exceptional. Not masterful. Competent. A session guitarist he'd worked with years earlier saw him backstage in Milwaukee. They talked for a few minutes. A small talk. Then, as the guy was leaving, "You know, Ace, you're a better player than people give you credit for. Maybe without all the makeup stuff, people will finally hear what you can actually do." Meant as a compliment. Received as confirmation, people didn't hear it before. In Boston, a music journalist asked during an interview, "Now that the visual spectacle is gone, do you feel pressure to prove yourself as a musician?" Ace just looked at him. "I've been proving myself every night for 15 years. But don't you think the makeup?" Next question. It didn't defend. He didn't explain. It just moved on. But the noise kept building. The constant whisper, "Were you ever real? Was the playing ever what mattered? Or were you always just a costume with a guitar?" Detroit. 1983, Cobo Arena. Mid-tour. Ace was tired. Not physically. A different kind of tired. The kind that comes from carrying something for too long. The show was typical. Loud. Energetic. The crowd responded to every song. Everything was working. Ace stood at his position on stage, playing the solo section of Cold Gin. His fingers moved across the fretboard. Clean. Precise. Technically flawless. And then he stopped. Used lifted his fingers away from the strings. Stood completely still. The band kept playing behind him. The song continued. But Ace had stepped outside of it. He tilted his head slightly. Listening. The arena was full. 7,000 people making 7,000 individual sounds that blended into one overwhelming roar. Screaming. Shouting. Singing along. But for the first time in 15 years, Ace wasn't hearing that. It was hearing something underneath it. Something he'd been too buried in noise, internal and external, to hear before. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. He lowered his guitar. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. Just lowered it. Let it hang from the strap while his hands dropped to his sides. Gene noticed first. Turned from his position at stage left, bass still pounding, and looked at Ace with confusion. Paul saw it next. Kept singing but his eyes went to Ace, concern flickering across his face. The band kept playing. The song continued without the guitar. The crowd didn't seem to notice, too caught up in the energy, the momentum, the collective experience. But Ace was standing completely still in the center of the chaos, used, listening. And what he heard, underneath all the noise, was clarity. The drums. Clear. Individual hits, each one distinct. The bass. Not just a rumble but actual notes, a melody line, a conversation with the drums. The vocals. Paul's voice carrying the lyric, supported by the music but not buried in it. And the space. The silence between the notes. The breath between the phrases. For 15 years, Ace had been part of the noise. Adding to it. Filling every gap. Playing constantly because that's what guitar heroes did, they filled the space with sound. But in this moment, standing silent while his band played around him, Ace realized something fundamental had shifted. The noise in his head, the voice that said they don't take you seriously, you're just a gimmick, the playing doesn't matter, was gone. Not because he'd proven anything. Not because he'd defended himself. Not because anyone had validated him. It was gone because he'd finally stopped listening to it. The silence he was hearing wasn't external. It was internal. The end of an argument he'd been having with himself for 15 years. He didn't need to prove he was a real musician. They'd been one all along. Being the makeup. Beneath the persona. Inside the spectacle. The guitar playing had always been real. The only person who doubted it was him. Ace lifted his guitar. His fingers found the strings. And he started playing again. But differently. Not filling space. Not adding to noise. Just playing. Clear. Intentional. Every note deliberate. The band felt it immediately. His bass locked in differently. Paul's vocal shifted. Even the drums seemed to breathe differently. The song transformed. Not louder. Not faster. Just clearer. What followed silenced everyone in the room. When the song ended, there was a beat of silence before the applause. 1 second. Maybe 2. In that silence, 7,000 people felt it. Something had changed. They couldn't name it. Most wouldn't remember it consciously. But they felt it. The playing had become music. Backstage after the show, Gene found Ace in the dressing room. What happened out there? Durin, called Gene. Ace was packing his guitar case. Stopped playing for a minute. I saw that. Why? Ace looked up. Needed to hear the silence. He waited for more explanation. Ace didn't offer any. He never did. 3 months later, a music journalist, not the one from Boston, a different one, was writing a retrospective piece on Kiss's non-makeup era. He interviewed session musicians, producers, people who'd worked with the band. One guitarist who'd jammed with Ace at a studio session said something that made it into the article. People think Frehley's just a showman who happens to play guitar. They got it backwards. He's a guitarist who happened to be part of a show. The difference matters. The article barely circulated. Most fans didn't read it. But Ace's sister mailed him a copy. He read that paragraph 3 times. Then folded the magazine and put it in his guitar case. Share and subscribe, some stories deserve to be remembered. Years later, decades later, music students would study Ace Frehley's playing. Not the spectacle. The actual guitar work. They'd note his use of space. The way he didn't overplay. The way his solos served the song rather than dominating it. They analyze his tone. His phrasing. His restraint. And they'd wonder why, during his time with Kiss, the critics focused so much on the makeup and so little on the musicianship. The answer was simple, the noise had been too loud. Both kinds. In 2014, a documentary crew interviewed Ace for a film about 1970s rock. They asked him about the makeup era, the spectacle, the transformation of rock into theater. Do you ever feel like the persona overshadowed the music? The interviewer asked. Ace thought for a long moment. The music was always there. Sometimes it takes a while for people to hear it. Sometimes it takes a while for you to hear it yourself. When did you hear it? Detroit. 1983, when I stopped playing and the noise was gone. The interviewer waited for elaboration. Ace didn't give any. He just smiled slightly and looked down at his hands, the same hands that had played 10,000 shows, a million notes, behind makeup and without it. You don't prove you're a musician by defending yourself, he said finally. You prove it by playing. And when you stop worrying about proving it, that's when people finally hear you. The documentary used that quote. But they cut the next part. The part where I said, the hardest silence to find isn't in the music. It's in your own head. Today, that Les Paul from the Detroit show sits in Ace's home studio. Ace still plays it. And sometimes, in the middle of a solo, he'll stop. Lift his fingers from the strings. Used to hear the silence again. To remember the night the noise finally left.